You know what's absolutely frustrating? You spend hours studying. Hours. You read the same chapter 3, 4 times. You make summaries, highlight everything, write until your hand hurts. And when you get to the exam, the presentation, the moment of applying it, you freeze. You don't remember anything. Or you remember vaguely, confused, incompletely. And you think, man, I studied so much. Where did it all go? How is it possible that I invested so much time and got so little result? And then there's that guy. There's always one. The one who seems to study half the time you do, who's always relaxed, who never seems stressed, but when the time comes, he nails it. Gets top marks, presents with confidence, applies knowledge effortlessly. And you're left wondering, what's this guy's secret? Is he naturally more intelligent? Does he have a photographic memory? What the heck is he doing differently? I was the guy who studied for hours and got little out of it. Seriously, I spent entire afternoons with my nose buried in books, making colorful summaries that looked like works of art, rereading material until I memorized every word. And my performance was mediocre. At best, I worked twice as hard as my classmates to get half the results. And that destroyed me because I really tried. It wasn't laziness. It wasn't a lack of dedication. It was that I simply didn't know how to study efficiently, until I discovered something that completely changed my game. It wasn't a motivational video. It wasn't a tip from a productivity guru. It was a technique developed and tested by Harvard researchers. A technique that goes against everything you've been taught about studying. Everything. And when I first read about it, I thought, this doesn't make sense. But I was so desperate for results that I decided to try it even though I thought it was strange. And man, in 2 weeks, my performance exploded. I was learning faster, retaining more, applying better. And the craziest part? I was studying fewer hours, like significantly less. I had cut my study time in half and was getting twice the results. It seemed like a hack. It seemed like cheating, but it was just science applied correctly. Today I'm going to teach you exactly this technique, step by step, the way Harvard teaches it. And if you apply this, if you really follow what I'm going to show you, you'll study less and achieve absurdly more. So forget everything you've been taught about how to study and pay attention, because this will revolutionize your results. The technique is called retrieval practice, and the concept is simple but profound. The way you study is probably wrong. You read, reread, highlight, summarize, and try to passively absorb as much information as possible. And you think that the more you expose your brain to the material, the more you learn. But that's an illusion. Here's the truth Harvard discovered through decades of research. You don't learn by reading. You don't learn by listening. You don't learn by summarizing. You learn by trying to retrieve information from memory. The act of pulling knowledge from your head, of trying to remember without looking, of testing yourself. That's the act that truly creates deep and lasting learning. Think of it this way. Your brain is like a muscle. If you just stare at weights, you don't get strong. You get strong by lifting them, by making the effort, by challenging the muscle. The same thing with learning. If you just look at the material, rereading it, your brain doesn't get stronger. It gets lazy because it doesn't need to make an effort. The information is right there in front of it, easy. But when you close the book and try to remember, when you force your brain to retrieve that information, that's when it works. That's when it creates strong and lasting connections. And there's more. When you read something and think you understand it, you're being tricked by what's called processing fluency. Because you just read it, it's fresh in your short-term memory. So when you read it again, it seems easy. It seems like you know it. And you confuse this ease with real learning. But it's not. It's just temporary familiarity. In a few days, it's gone. On the other hand, when you test yourself, when you try to recall information without looking and you have difficulty, you immediately realize what you really know and what you don't know. There's no illusion. There's no self-deception. You see your gaps clearly. And when you finally manage to pull that information from memory after effort, your brain marks it as important. It creates stronger connections. It makes it much harder to forget. Harvard researchers conducted experiments comparing students who used the traditional method versus students who used retrieval practice. The same amount of study time, the same material, the only difference was the method. And the results were astounding. Students using retrieval practice performed 50% better on long-term tests. 50%. With the same time invested. So how do you apply this in practice? I'm going to give you the complete system I use that transformed my learning. First, you need to understand that studying now has 3 distinct phases: initial exposure, active retrieval, and spaced repetition. Most people only do the first one and think they're studying. You're going to do all 3 strategically. Phase 1. Initial exposure. Here you read the material, attend the class, consume the content. But you do it differently. You don't highlight everything. You don't stop to make a detailed summary. You simply consume it trying to understand the general concept, the structure, the main ideas. You are creating a basic mind map. And this should be quick. If you have a 20-page chapter to study, you read it in 20-30 minutes at most, without stopping, without dawdling. And while you read, you do only one thing. You identify the key concepts, the important questions, the central points. You can lightly highlight or jot down keywords, but you don't summarize yet. You don't try to memorize. You just consume attentively and identify what is important. Phase 2. And this is where the magic happens. Active retrieval. Immediately after reading, you close the book. You take a blank sheet of paper, and you try to write down everything you remember about what you just read. Everything. Main concepts, details, examples, connections. You force your brain to pull that information without help. And here's the critical point. It's going to be difficult. You'll freeze. You'll forget things. You'll feel that uncomfortable sensation of knowing you just read something, but can't quite remember it. Perfect. That difficulty is exactly what creates deep learning. You don't give up. You push yourself. You strive to remember. You spend 5-10 minutes trying to extract everything from your memory. After you've extracted everything you can, then you open the material again and compare. What did you forget? What did you remember wrong? What did you understand well? You clearly identify your gaps, and then you specifically study those gaps. You reread only the parts you didn't remember, you focus on what you got wrong, you fill in the holes, and then close the book again and repeat. Try to retrieve it again and again, until you can pull all the important information from memory without help. This may take 3 or 4 rounds, but each round is immensely strengthening the neural connections. You are truly learning. Phase 3. Spaced review. You don't study once and forget. You revisit the material at strategic intervals using the same active retrieval method. First review 1 day later. Second review 3 days later. Third review 1 week later. Fourth review 1 month later. And in each review, you do the same thing. You try to retrieve without looking, identify gaps, fill them in, repeat. And the increasing interval is crucial because it forces your brain to work harder with each review. If you review every day, it's too easy. Your brain relaxes. But if you let a few days pass, when you try to remember again, it's harder. It requires more effort, and that effort creates much stronger retention. Now I'm going to give you specific active recall techniques that you can use. First, flashcards, but not the way you probably use them. You create questions on one side, answers on the other, and you test yourself. Look at the question. Try to answer without flipping the card. Force recall. Only then do you check if you got it right. And the cards you get wrong, you put in a separate pile to review more often. Second technique, Feynman method. You choose a concept you've studied and try to explain it aloud as if you were teaching it to a 12-year-old. No technical jargon, no unnecessary complexity, simple and clear. And if you get stuck, if you can't explain it simply, you've identified a gap in your understanding. You go back to the material, study that specific part, and try to explain it again. Third technique, practical questions. Instead of just reading theory, you look for questions, exercises, and problems on that topic and try to solve them without consulting anything. It forces application. And when you make a mistake, you not only look at the correct answer, you understand why you made the mistake, which concept you didn't master, and you study that specifically. Fourth technique, mind mapping from memory. You take a blank sheet of paper and try to draw all the content from memory in the form of a mind map. Central concept in the middle, branches to subtopics, connections between ideas, all from memory. And then compare it with the original material to see what was missing. Fifth technique, recorded oral summary. You record yourself explaining all the content from memory without consulting anything. And then you listen to the recording critically. Where did you hesitate? Where did you not explain well? Those are your gaps. What do all these techniques have in common? They force active retrieval. They make your brain work. And this work, this desirable difficulty as researchers call it, is what creates lasting learning. Now, here are some common mistakes you need to avoid. First mistake, passively rereading multiple times. This is a brutal waste of time. You read it once for initial exposure, and then everything else is active recall. Passive rereading creates an illusion of knowledge without real knowledge. Second mistake, highlighting everything. When you highlight half the text, you're not identifying what's important, you're just painting on paper. Highlighting only works when it's ultra-selective, only key concepts, less than 5% of the text. And even then, it's far less important than active recall. Third mistake, making elaborate summaries during the first reading. This is procrastination disguised as productivity. You spend hours making beautiful, colorful, organized summaries and learn very little, because you're just copying information, not forcing retrieval. A summary only makes sense after you've already tried to recall it from memory. Then you summarize what really matters. Fourth mistake, studying everything at once. A 10-hour marathon the day before the exam. Your brain doesn't learn that way. It needs time to consolidate information. Studying in smaller sessions over days and weeks with spaced review is infinitely superior to cramming everything into one session. Fifth mistake, not testing yourself because you're afraid of making mistakes. Dude, making mistakes while studying is the best thing that can happen, because you identify gaps and correct them before the real test. Testing yourself and making mistakes during preparation is much better than deluding yourself into thinking you know everything and then making a mistake when it matters. Let me tell you exactly what happened when I implemented this. I had a test with dense, complex content. Normally, I would spend weeks studying several hours a day. This time, I used retrieval practice. I read the material in 2 hours. Then I spent an hour trying to recall everything from memory, identifying gaps, filling them in, and recalling again. The next day, a 30-minute review with active recall. 3 days later, another 30 minutes. A week later, another 30 minutes. Total time invested, less than 5 hours spread over 10 days. Result? Top marks. And more importantly, I really knew the material. It wasn't temporary rote memorization that disappears after the exam. It was a deep understanding that stayed with me. And since then, I've used it for everything. Learning languages, studying for certifications, mastering new skills. The principle is always the same. Rapid initial exposure, intense active retrieval, strategic spaced review. It works for any type of learning. So here's the challenge for you. Take the next piece of content you need to study. Apply exactly what I taught you. Read it once carefully, identifying key concepts. Close the material and force active recall, trying to extract everything from memory. Identify gaps, fill them in, recall again. And schedule spaced reviews, always using active recall. And compare. Compare how much you learn with this method versus how much you learned by passively rereading multiple times. The difference will shock you. You'll realize you were wasting massive amounts of time with inefficient methods, and now you have the tool that Harvard uses that works, that is scientifically proven. One last thing. This will be uncomfortable at first. Active recall is more difficult than passive review. You'll feel more mental strain. You'll freeze up more. You'll make more mistakes, and your brain will try to convince you to go back to the old, more comfortable method. Don't go back. This discomfort is a sign that it's working. It's the effort that creates the result. If this video gave you the technique you needed to finally study efficiently, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel because I bring content like this every week, practical techniques based on science that really work. And comment below telling me which subject or skill you're going to apply this to. In a few weeks, come back and tell me the results. You don't need to study more, you need to study better. And now you know exactly how to do it. Apply it. See you next time.